Hey, everybody. Welcome to In the Know with Nina. I'm your host, Dr. Nina Crowley. I'm the Director of Clinical Thought Leadership and Partnerships at SIGA, where we partner with healthcare providers to offer body composition solutions. I'm so excited today to be joined by Monique Class. She is a functional medicine practitioner. She's got 35 years in the business. She's senior faculty at the Institute for Functional Medicine, the Director of Coaching Development for the Functional Medicine Coaching Academy, and a clinical instructor at Yale School of Nursing. And Monique has been an early body comp adopter. And so I'm really excited to have you on to talk through that today.
Oh, that's great. I'm delighted to be here, Nina. This is one of my favorite topics.
Thanks so much. So yeah, I wanted to dig in a little bit to that because you've been doing body count probably longer than I've been thinking about it at all. So I'd love to hear, a little bit about maybe how it's changed over the years, how you were using it early on. What are some of the metrics that you used to focus on? And I think a lot of our practitioners had experience maybe early days and weren't as excited about it, but it's come such a long way in that time too. So I feel like that's a good point that our clinicians would really like to hear.
Oh, well, I started in the early days, and probably when I started using body comp, maybe about 8 to 10 years into my career. So about 25 years ago, the old body comps where people had to lie down and you connected them to electrodes. And, you do the waist circumference and you can measure muscle mass and fluid shifts. But so many things threw it off. Like if they, depending on when they ate last night, if they had a cup of coffee in the morning, if they were on their period. So the data it was tough to get consistent data because all the variables had to be just so. But it was helpful to look at patterns because I was working a lot with women that had different levels of metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance. So I was marrying the data to the lab to their personal experience because you've had this experience with women, right? They'll come in, especially menopause. This like classic. They're like, my weight's really not changed, but I can't button my pants. Where the weight is being distributed has changed. And the opposite's true. Like the scale's not going down, but my clothes are fitting better. And we're so married. We're so hypnotized. We're in a trance over the number on the scale. So working with the body comp and with interventions and making it about body composition and labs and not about the scale, so helpful both psychologically and for me as a practitioner with knowing, is what I'm doing actually working on a cellular level? Am I improving their health or are they just losing weight, which doesn't mean I'm improving their health at all? So, understanding the difference between sarcopenia, that skinny fat, and people that have a ton of muscle, but maybe the BMI is elevated, but they're super healthy because muscle is medicine, right? Muscle has a ton of mitochondria. The metabolic trajectory is so much better. So I kind of understood that early on. So the basic body comp, although not perfect, gave me something to work with where I could shift the conversation, which was so helpful to people, both physically and psychologically.
Well said. Yeah, and we are such in a trance. I've been talking about that a lot lately with just, even women of our age. And so I'm hopeful that the younger generation is not so obsessed with that as we, talk about this in their earlier days. But it's something that takes a lot of work to get people away from. And I know you're committed to the behavioral side of coaching and
Yeah.
counseling, which I so appreciate. But it takes a lot of work to do that. So I'm glad to hear that body comp has been helpful for you in that area as well. And I think, we talked a lot lately about some talks that you're giving coming up on menopause and the transition and that long period of time where people are coming and saying, hey, my weight may or may not have changed, but things are moving and different. And how do we look at that? So I'd love to hear, a little bit about, from your perspective, how is that changing? What are some of the things that we're noticing as women are in that transitional period?
Yeah. And so menopause is a metabolic inflection point. And so most women think it's just them. I'm getting older. But it's not the age, it's actually what happens when the hormones shift. So, really understanding that menopause is a castration event. when estrogen falls off the cliff, right? So perimenopause, the ovaries are working part-time remote from home, right? So they're working, but not
Oh, I like that.
all that hard. Menopause, it just bottoms out. And there's estrogen receptors in every part of the body. And there's estrogen receptors involved with where we distribute fat. Like when you're on board and in your fertility years, for most people, depending on their genetics, we're going to store fat in the subcutaneous area. That's where estrogen puts it. And we're insulin sensitive if we're doing everything right. So if you're doing everything right, you're going to lose, you're going to be able to maintain the body comp you want if, all your ducks are in a row. In menopause, you could be doing many things right. And still when estrogen drops, the wheels come off the bus. We start storing weight in the abdominal area or the visceral fat pretty quickly. And depending on your genetics, people do it more than others. And then a couple of other things happen metabolically speaking. We become less insulin sensitive. So it takes more insulin. Insulin starts going up. Its job is to lock into the receptors of the cell and have these little Pac-Men open the door so glucose can go in. So our glucose and insulin dynamics change. And insulin as a hormone, although we need it for life, if we're making too much of it, we're going to store weight and not burn weight. And insulin and cortisol, stress and sugar, we're going to store in that visceral area in menopause. That's the preferential place to store weight. And there's consequences to the weight in that area, right? It's what we call hotter fat because it's metabolically active. It emits inflammatory cytokines. And we know this from literature, Nina, and it's everywhere. It's not just me saying this, that inflammation is the pivot point of every single complex chronic disease. So what do we see in menopause as like estrogen just tanks and every system feels depleted? We see an increase in cardiovascular disease, an increase in neurodegenerative disease, an increase in autoimmune disease. Because as estrogen goes down, inflammation goes up, weight shifts to the middle, and we become more insulin resistant. And the fourth thing that I've been reading about is we make less GLP, our endogenous GLP. Like everybody knows what GLP-1s are now. Pretty much, it's hard to find someone that hasn't heard that word at this point in time. But we make our endogenous GLP-1 in the L cells of the gut. And we make hordes of it when we're younger and if we're metabolically healthy, if we haven't done things to trash it, meaning getting enough protein, getting enough fiber, getting enough fermented foods, moving our body, we will make enough. In menopause, even if you're doing those things, as estrogen dips, our endogenous GLP-1 goes down. So our ability to metabolize carbohydrates, even good ones like rice and quinoa and things of that nature, we don't metabolize them as well. So we can't tolerate the same macronutrient distribution or indiscretions naturally in menopause as we could before. So it's a real metabolic inflection point. So understanding that, number one, it's not just you, it's what happens with the hormonal shifts. But the hopeful message is now that we know what the game is, like we've got the playbook, we know how to put strategies in place to compensate, and we can track with the BIA, where are you storing? What's going on with your muscle mass? So it's a wonderful time in history to be able to track and tweak, and then understand what the whole playbook is of what's happening hormonally and how that influences.
Well, and I think it's interesting timing too, because around that time we're seeing a lot of shift in muscle mass. And that's, another piece is we're getting older, we see that declining at the same time. So, I've seen some graphs even where, like you said, the weight might not be moving at all, but the two things are sort of crossing. And that is definitely something that people, freak out about or worry about, or just sort of wondering, like you said, is it me? And being able to give them that data to say, this is happening, this is what we know to be happening. And there's also some hope that there's some ways around it. And I think that's another piece of the puzzle these days. We've talked a little bit about the women's health study and the changes for people who are maybe in their 60s. They didn't have access to some of the hormone therapy that now those who are the younger age will have access to. And I think it's an interesting timing for all of that to be happening too.
Oh, I so agree, and I'm glad you called that out, because we do rapidly every decade after 30, we are losing muscle mass at a higher rate. Then you hit 60, it's like a massive reduction in muscle mass because the androgens also change. So estrogen goes down much further, right? Because the ovary makes 90 to 95% of the estrogen. The androgens, we can still make the androgens like testosterone. Like women make testosterone, but it's from the adrenal glands. And this is like the key point. We make about 75% of our androgens are from the adrenal glands. But if we've been running it hard, like most of us have, kids, job, juggling things for years and years and years, we have drained our adrenal bank account to the point where we can't make the androgens. So we're not, it's like double trouble. Naturally, it's hard to hold on to muscle mass. Within it, 24 hours of not using the muscles, we're going to atrophy. Where when you're younger, it's about 72 hours. So we got that happening. And then we don't have the androgen supply because our adrenal bank account from just the way women run life. Like it's wonderful that we have all these opportunities as women, but it's the good, bad, and the ugly. Like, how are we managing the fact that we can be in the workforce? We still have to cook and clean, most of us cook and clean and run the house and do that, right? So there's a big difference when I check people's levels now than many, many years ago, where women were not carrying the ball in all these dimensions as much
Hmm.
and didn't have power positions and still had to run their homes.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
and I know there's a lot of question, and we've had, had some folks on to talk a little bit about the endocrine side and
Yes.
the hormones, but the hormone replacement, or
Yeah.
that being an option, I think it is hopeful that,
Yeah.
we don't have to go through some of the negative or all of the negative side effects that we hear about, because these are options now. And there's tests, there's symptoms, there's all the management, and the counseling to find a cocktail or a combination of therapies that might work.
Yeah, I love this moment in time where, like, I never stopped prescribing HRT because I never believed the study. Like, I knew that they were
Oh, no.
talking a relative risk and not an absolute risk. Like, I knew what it was. So, I kept prescribing, but patients were afraid of it. But I will call this out, and those practitioners listening that do this is just putting estrogen and progesterone back. People feel better, but they don't automatically lose weight. Like, people think, like, well, you give them estrogen and they're going to lose weight. Not the case. You give them estrogen and progesterone, and then you throw in testosterone later on. That's how I do it. I layer it. They feel better, right? They've got their energy back, their moods better, they're sleeping better. So consequently, they can get good habits off the ground. But you still have to combine lifestyle. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to put you on hormone replacement therapy and your body comp is going to change and all this. It's a piece of the puzzle and an important piece of, like, what I would call well-being and vital pause of feeling vital during menopause. But you still have to put in the hard work of all the lifestyle factors and figuring out what it is for you, right? There is no one thing for everybody. I think we're understanding that more than ever with this whole person medicine or personalized approach or precision medicine, whatever word you want to use, that everybody needs a different hormetic hack to get the system moving in the right direction. Some people, it's their food. Some people, their food is perfect, but they're not sleeping. If you're not sleeping, you're gaining weight. I mean, you're looking at the research. It's astonishing. One night of bad sleep in a healthy individual, if we check their bloods, they present like somebody with insulin resistance.
Oh, I hate that. I hate those statistics, because sleep is an area for me that is not optimized either.
Yeah, I mean, it's so you have to focus on the right leverage point for the individual. Like, you got to optimize the sleep first. And that's where, like, progesterone is just a rock star for most women. You put progesterone in, you figure out their dose, you get them sleeping again. And then once they're sleeping again and their energy and their vitality comes back, they can light the world on fire and begin to make the changes. If they're not sleeping, how are they going to exercise? If they're not sleeping, you tell them to go to the gym, you got to move your body, lift weights. It's not going to happen. They don't have the excess reserve to do. It's not a wise thing to do when they're tanked like that. So it's kind of understanding, like, what is it for this person, you know?
And I think the more, I love the way you're talking about that too, the personalizing, individualized approach, because when we only have a medicine or two, we've even seen this in the GLP-1 space where, everybody's talking about what happens with this one or two medications. Then there starts to be an expectation of, oh, you get on this one and this happens. But the more options and varieties and dosages and types, I think the more we're going to be able to say, there's so many different pathways. You're an individual, like your friend being on this and you being on this are not the same. And I think that can help, people's expectations of what's going to happen too.
100%, especially in this GLP-1. I went kicking and screaming several years ago into this. I did not. I was doubling down on, I'm never going to prescribe it. Like this should, until I started working with it in tiny doses for appropriate people and surrounding it with lifestyle changes. I mean, this is where it should win the Nobel Prize, not because everybody should be on it, but because it gives the bridge people need. It helps them get momentum and traction in small doses. Do this combined with lifestyle, especially in menopausal women, right? So when you look at the research, and I was like dumbfounded when I read this, that small amounts of GLP-1 in menopausal women work 30% better than somebody in their fertility years because of the dynamics of the hormonal milieu and our own drop in endogenous. Like a little bit will have a profound impact on a menopausal. Not that I'm not saying all menopausal women should be on it, but if people are really stuck and doing everything right, or they're just stuck and can't get off the ground, tiny pulse doses lower the inflammation, global inflammation in the system. They increase lipolysis, which is fat burning, right? So if we're lowering risk, we're getting the system moving, and then we're breaking old habits of eating late at night or drinking too much alcohol. And then they start to, especially if you're counseling them and we're tracking it with body comp, and you get them to do little movements and they're not losing muscle, they're losing fat, we're changing body comp, we're making them healthier than ever before because they're using all of these different lifestyle factors in combination with a small precision dose. But that dose is different for everybody, and not everybody needs it. So you always want to give the body a chance. I mean, I think this is a moment in time where, because the GLP-1s are so big, we've learned so much about the technology of these L cells. Like, what can we do? I'm always asking myself, and I say this to patients, what can we do to increase your endogenous GLP-1? That's the win. Not putting the shot in, keeping you on it forever, raising the dose every month. That's crazy. That's crazy. It's irresponsible. The win is, how do we increase your own? May or may not use a small amount. If we use a small amount, get it in, get it out, get the changes in place, change the set points, track it. Got to track what you're doing. So if you're given these things, this from like people you talk to, and so it keeps raising the dose where people think they shouldn't feel hungry at all. What you're doing is they're not eating. We're creating eating disorder mentality because they're like, it's so great, I don't eat at all. It's not so great. You're downregulating your basal metabolic rate. You're losing all your muscle mass, and we can track it on the Sika machine. And so we're having metabolic adaptations that are actually making them sicker and addicted to the drug they can't get off because they'll gain everything back. That's the shadow of these GLP-1s.
It's the dosages are interesting too. I mean, I've got a lot of thoughts even in, the messaging that a regular average person is hearing about tiny doses and microdosing. I think where I worry about that term and that approach is that I've seen so many people who do need a higher dose to have an effect. So to me,
I love
that, and then you're like, oh, but that's not my experience. Everyone around me is having the fat melt off of them or the pounds melt off of them. What if that's not my experience? And so that the more we can say, like, this is the range.
Yes.
If be the person who responds at a tiny dose, that's ideal. But if not, there's more power in the next dose potentially for you. And then, the experimenting with coming off, trying a smaller amount, I think that's where we'll see more and more data coming out the longer that people are on this too.
I love that you called that out, because that's my first conversation with people. Okay, we're going to put you on this. We're going to track you. If this is what we're doing, we're going to do all of these things. And I start there with, we're going to start on a tiny dose, but I don't know what your dose is. because depending on where people were on the metabolic curve to begin with, if the can was kicked further down the line where they've got super high insulins or hemoglobin A1C, going to need a higher dose, probably, not definitively. But that higher dose doesn't need to be 15 milligrams unless they're diabetic. That higher dose can be like 5 milligrams instead of the 1.5 milligrams that I can get away with a lot of people. So it depends on genetics. It depends on how they metabolize the drugs. You're so right. And not making them feel shameful. I had one lady that was afraid to go up to 5 milligrams because she was like, that's not a microdose. It's like, that is still way lower than the 15 milligrams they're throwing everybody else on, right? So it's so true. It's taking away the shame and just the N of one. And this is where the seek of body comp, like, what's the data? Are we losing visceral fat? Are we maintaining muscle mass? What's the dose that you have no side effects, that we're losing about a pound to a pound and a half of fat a week and not tanking your muscle and the fat's coming off in the visceral area? We don't know that until we go back and forth and track and tweak and look at labs, combine it with story and combine it with the body comp machine. That's how we know that where the puck is headed for this person and that what we're doing is actually working, or do we need to make an adjustment with what's happening? So I love that you called that out, because yes, that is a big thing. People now think that they're doing something wrong if they need 5 milligrams, which is still historically low.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things we've talked about in your practice is what you're using and some of the metrics from our device that you like. So I know visceral fat's one of them, skeletal
Love it.
mass another. I'd love to hear, even in your female patients of this age, like how fast or how long does it take to see some clinical movement in some of those parameters?
Yeah. uh, 3 months, I'm seeing statistically significant changes in visceral fat at the 12-week mark. Not that there's not changes before then, but I'm trying not to overplay it and measure them all the time and get them crazy. So I like to do things like I like to do labs every 12 weeks. If I'm tracking an abnormal lab value, I like to see the trajectory. I like to do the body comp every 12 weeks, and I'm seeing statistical changes in visceral fat. Now, I'm talking to them in between, or one of the coaches in the office is talking to them in between. So I have a sense of what's going on with them. It's not like I let them leave them to their own devices for 12 weeks, but that's where we're tracking and then saying, okay, we got to change the protein here, or we got to think about adding more contraction of muscle here, or we're right on point for what you told me you wanted. And for when you look at these graphs, which are gorgeous, where we're plotting you on the XY axis of, muscle to fat ratio, which, Sika makes it easy with this red, yellow, green because I'm a visual learner, for me to look at the graphs and say, okay, green, we're good, we're optimal. Yellow, like Mayday, let's start to have a conversation because we're heading in the wrong direction. And, with the red, like you've got to sometimes do more labs and more tweaking based on, where you are. It's provocative, it stimulates conversation, and it's easy to see it and digest it, both for me as a practitioner, but for the clients to look at their own data. They're looking at gauges that light up for them in this really cool, easy way to assess. I love visceral fat marker. That's really important to me.
And I've seen, some really high levels come down, with some when people send me their reports. And I think that's it's one of those markers where you can really say this is not just weight, or even
Yeah.
sometimes, body fat percentage can almost be a proxy for weight loss, right? But it's location, it's where it is, and it really connects to all of that other cardiometabolic risk, and especially as we're talking about, kind of the intersection of menopause and cardiometabolic risk, or cardiovascular risk. What's changing and how we can see that number coming down being related to less future risk or less future disease.
100%. I mean, it's a super important metric, right? So, like they say in real estate, location, location, location. The location of storing weight in that particular area just has a profound impact. It's its own endocrine organ, right? So it's constantly emitting inflammatory cytokines. This isn't me. This is research, it's data, we know it to be true. So depending on someone's genetic weak link, that inflammation can light up in the arteries of the cardiovascular system and increase, atherosclerosis and coronary artery disease and plaque in the arteries. It can go to the brain. It's like brain on fire, where it's turning on neurodegenerative disease. It can go to the joints and turn on autoimmune. So, depending on your genetic weak link, is where you're going to feel that level of constant inflammation. But it's the pivot point for every single complex chronic disease. So, to be able to have a marker that I could say, hey, I'm not just doing and there's nothing wrong with vanity. I'm vain. We're all vain. So there's nothing wrong with losing weight to look better. But for me, that visceral marker is gold, because that's the game. The game is to lose the weight in that area. And you are reversing complex chronic disease when you do that. And, it's such a powerful, and, I focus on that. I explain that to people. I explain to them what it does and why it's so important. Like, yeah, I know they want to fit in their size, whatever that number is for them, pants or a dress for their son's or daughter's wedding or bar mitzvah. I know that that's their game, but I also have the conversation about their long-term health goals. Like, what are we looking to prevent here? I have never spoken to one person that their parent didn't have dementia, had dementia or Alzheimer's, where that was in front and center. Like, I don't want to have that level of cognitive impairment as I age. I don't want my kids to have the burden I had. Like, it's a real phobia for many, many women. So to be able to give them metrics to lower their risk, that will lower their risk. Lower that number, you're lowering their risk. So it's really, really fun to be able to do that. The other thing, like, this is just an aside, but when you look at what are the big risk factors in menopause? Cardiovascular disease, number one, dementia, and then osteoporosis. The more inflammation you have, the more bone loss you have. So inflammation in that visceral area accelerates the osteoclast, the bones, osteoblasts build the B, and the osteoclasts dig out old. So more inflammation, you've got more osteoporosis. So when you tether the conversation to what they're worried about, you're worried about osteoporosis. When we lower this, we're the your bone building ability and this dance between osteoblasts and osteoclasts. We stop the digging, right? If they're worried about dementia, you put it through the lens of neurodegenerative disease because you're lowering that risk. I mean, it's like I said, it's science. There's tons of papers on all of this stuff. If it's cardiovascular, like my mom died of an MI at 53, I heard the other day, lower the visceral fat, you're changing that trajectory, even with those genetics of an ApoB. So it's fun to be able to personalize, and it's fun to have a tool like the Sika BIA that widens the lens of the conversation and allows you to show how the systems connect to their concerns, not my concerns, like their concerns. I think that's what's fun for me, putting on my coaching hat.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's one of the things I appreciate about your approach so much is you're really taking the patient at the center and figuring out what matters to them.
Right.
And then, not just the markers and the, potential or future risk or disease, but even how they're feeling. I mean, and that's a huge part, I know, of this, quality of life. And I do think, a lot of times we do minimize the aesthetic piece as a goal. And, but I think recognizing that is a driver for folks and just calling that what it is and putting that into the mix. If that's usually not the only thing that's driving someone to want to make change. I think, that's a big piece of this too.
No, but it's important because it's tethered to self-esteem in menopause. So you're at a time in life where you're already feeling like you're aging out of things, right? Like, oh, my opportunities aren't going to be there. And there's, people don't notice me as much. And maybe my partner doesn't find me as attractive. We're all thinking these things and seeing the changes in the mirror, right? So it's tethered to self-esteem. Like when people can fit into clothes and they feel good in them, and they feel like they're their ideal self, they radiate differently. They can like step into aging a little bit more gracefully. So it's tethered to overall well-being. Even though as a practitioner, like I'm focused on the end game, I do understand that their metrics are different. And so it's kind of, you can do them simultaneously.
Yeah.
You will get you fit into that dress for the wedding. You'll look like a rock star. And
It's the values piece of the evidence-based practice that, sometimes we forget when we're so focused on the data and the literature.
yeah, and again, Nina, you know how to do this, but you hear, like, I'm always listening. Like, what's their hook? Like, is it to get in that dress for their son's wedding? Because then I put everything around that. So you listen. Are they worried about Alzheimer's? Are they looking to get in that dress? And then it's like, hey, we're moving these markers on the machine, and you're going to be able to pin into that dress. Like, that's the win, because then there's buy-in. And, of course, with habit change, even though I know there's like a million different habits we can do to improve and lower visceral fat, it's what's available to that person. You can't throw 20 things at them and a million supplements and think very few people are going to do that. Right. So the next level of conversation is like, what's the first move that's actually available? How can we get this habit off the ground? And habit strategy, it's like you got to establish the habit before you optimize it. So these micro habits, in these little ways, people can get things off the ground when they're micro. Like, I'm going to walk 2 minutes every hour around my house. I mean, the data is profound for lowering glucose disposal by 25%. So little habits done consistently have a big impact, and you can measure it on the body comp. So it's looking at this holistic approach and using the body comp, marrying it the the labs and to their desires, and be able to use it as a motivation tool for the client, but also as a way for you as the clinician to know, is what I'm recommending actually working or not? Do we need to shift the conversation for a moment? Am I making them better, worse, or is nothing happening metabolically speaking? So, I mean, I think that's where it's it's easy to do. It's like in your office, it's accessible, it's not expensive. It's just always been a great tool. And I love the fact that you combine it with the tape measurement. So you're really getting more accurate data. You're not just using waist circumference alone, which was good in the day, but not enough. You're like combining it and then getting this visceral fat number. I was like over the moon when I first talked to your team. And I'm like, you've got a visceral fat.
And it's not,
I'm like salivating.
and I think that's a lot of times people are like leaders, that's it's a tough number that we don't really have our head around. But I kind of
Right.
like that because it does shift us a little bit away from pounds of anything. We're sort of tallying up and trying to make, the math work out. So I just love that. And I mean, you're really been a great source of information and education for me in learning how to do this in practice, and in an excited way. So I'm sure that radiates to your patients, and they're excited about it too.
Yeah, and they're excited to use the machine. Like, they'll mess me, hey, can I come in? And I feel like there feel changes. I want to see it.
You
They
want to
love
come
it.
too frequently.
Oh, yeah, come on in. We'll throw you on the machine.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation and for all the other, future and conversations that we've had before. I think this has been fantastic. And I know that our clinicians listening will be excited about, hearing what you do and doing the same in their practice.
Oh, thank you, Nina. It's always a joy. It's always fun energy back and forth with you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you soon. Thank you.
See you soon.